Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the stone-walled silence of a medieval monastery, where the only sounds are the soft scratch of quills on parchment and the faint chanting echoing from some faraway chapel. You're standing in a dim room lit by narrow windows and the flicker of oil lamps. The air smells like dust, beeswax, and centuries of musty parchment. Across the long wooden benches, monks sit hunched in brown robes, copying manuscripts by hand. No printers, no Control+C, just quills, ink, and eternal patience. You, unfortunately, are now one of them. Congratulations. You probably won't survive this job without an ink stain or two, or a cramp in your spine. But don't worry, I'll guide you through it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and what time it is where you're listening. I'm always curious. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up early, earlier than a rooster with a grudge. The monastery bell tolls just before dawn, dragging you out of a straw mattress that feels like it was stuffed with pine cones and secrets. Your robe's itchy, your sandals are too big, and there's no coffee. Just silence. And ink duty. You trudge to the scriptorium, a chilly chamber with walls thick enough to block out even the most enthusiastic choir practice. Candles flicker low. One monk sneezes, the only sign of life. Your fingers are already sore, and you haven't even held a quill yet. The table in front of you is cluttered with half-used goose feathers, chunks of dried ink, and scraps of failed parchment. There's also a smell, a sort of tangy metallic mustiness. It clings to everything. Welcome to the glamorous world of medieval writing. Ink doesn't come in bottles with friendly brand names like Midnight Noir or Obsidian Black. No, back in your monkish day, ink is made from scratch. Literally. From crushed oak galls, iron salts, rainwater, and more patience than most of us have scrolling through terms and conditions. Your fellow scribes aren't exactly chatty. They've taken vows of silence, after all. So everything is communicated through dramatic sighs, eye rolls, and the occasional scribbled note that says things like, "Brother Cedric keeps stealing my quills." You look over at Brother Alfric, who's already hard at work. He gives you a tired nod and dips his quill into a small inkwell, carefully scratching Latin script into a stretched sheep's skin. That's right, your pages are literally animal hide. The parchment is smooth, but slightly translucent. Occasionally, you see a hair embedded in the corner. Try not to gag. There's a rhythm to this place. Dip, scratch, pause, dip again. And every few minutes, someone sighs like their soul just gave up halfway through Psalm 23. But here's the thing, this ink is no joke. It's dark, smooth, and long-lasting. The formula works so well, we can still read manuscripts made over 700 years ago. But you don't just walk in and get handed ink. Oh no, that would be too easy. You're going to learn the process from the very beginning. And that means leaving this cozy chamber of suffering and venturing into the forest. You bundle up, grab a sack, and head out through the monastery gates, your sandals slapping against the dewy grass. You pass the herb garden, full of things that either cure your ailments or make you hallucinate politely. And then you walk under the canopy of oak trees. Majestic, towering, slightly ominous. The perfect setting for foraging the most bizarre ingredient in your future writing career, oak galls. Historians still argue whether monks truly understood why oak galls worked so well in ink, or if they were just really good at copying what older scribes told them. But either way, they knew oak galls were key. Now, oak galls aren't nuts. They're not seeds. They're weird little growths caused by wasps laying eggs in oak tree branches. The tree responds by creating a knobby, tumor-like ball around the larvae. Yes, you're about to make beautiful sacred scripture using wasp baby bunkers. Try not to think too hard about that. You spot one hanging from a low branch, round, brown, and slightly wrinkled. You twist it off, then another and another. Soon your sack is full, and you're covered in oak dust and existential questions. Back at the scriptorium, Brother Alfric raises an eyebrow as you return, sack in hand. He scribbles, "Don't forget to dry them first this time." Because yes, even back then, people forgot crucial steps and ruined entire batches of ink. One monk in Prague reportedly threw out an entire pot of galls because he thought they were demonic seeds. We all make mistakes. You set the galls by the fire to dry, knowing it'll take days before they're ready to be crushed. In the meantime, you practice your Latin. You try not to poke a hole in the parchment. You fail. You try again. And eventually, you start to feel the strange peace of this world. There's no rushing, no buzzing phones, just ink, parchment, and the endless tick of time. One letter after another, forming words that might outlive you by centuries. Maybe millennia. You pause, stretch your aching hand, and glance down at your robe, now decorated with your first ink stain. Welcome to the club. It won't be your last. And just think, this whole process, we've only just started. You're standing beneath the heavy shade of ancient oaks, the air cool and damp around your ankles. Birds call lazily from above, but her eyes are trained on something far less majestic than the sweeping limbs and crisp green leaves. You're hunting warts, specifically the botanical kind. Ocals. They dangle from branches like little wooden marbles, knobby and uneven, ranging in color from dusty beige to scorched brown. Up close, they look a bit like something that shouldn't be touched without gloves, or at least a tetanus prayer. And yet, this is gold to a medieval scribe. Ugly, lumpy gold. You reach up and snap one off. It makes a soft pop as it detaches, like a tiny acorn giving up on life. You drop it into your sack, which is already filling with galls of various sizes. Some are light and hollow. Others are dense, almost rock-like. You give one a curious sniff. Bad idea. It smells faintly of vinegar, moss, and bug graveyard. You cough dramatically into the misty air and hear Brother Alfred chuckle from a few paces away. He never laughs, but apparently your suffering is entertaining enough. Now here's the kicker. These oak galls exist because a particular species of wasp lays its eggs inside young oak buds. The tree, confused and possibly annoyed, responds by encasing the larvae in this growth as a sort of unwilling nursery. It's like nature's version of bubble wrap, except with insects. Historians still argue whether monks truly grasped that this wart-looking thing was a wasp cocoon, or if they just knew it worked great for ink and didn't ask too many questions. In fairness, you wouldn't either. You're trying to make a psalter, not a biology textbook. The best galls for ink making are those caused by Cynops quercusfolii, a tiny gall wasp with a big impact on medieval literacy. These wasps were the unsung heroes of the Dark Ages. Without them, your ink would be pale, watery, and barely legible. So yes, tonight you can fall asleep thanking a parasitic insect for helping monks preserve human knowledge. It's that kind of story. You continue collecting, your sack thumping against your hip. The forest path is lined with mossy stones and curious rabbits who eye you like you're interrupting their brunch. You mutter a half-hearted blessing at them and move on. You remember the abbot's warning from earlier. Don't take the green ones. They're too fresh. We're not making gall salad. You don't know if he was joking. Probably not. Medieval monks had a serious sarcasm game, especially when it came to ink. By midday, your sack is full. You trudge back toward the monastery with at least 30 oak galls, each the size of a chestnut with dreams of being useful. The bell tolls for noon prayers, but Brother Alfric waves you past the chapel. You have more important work now. Ink waits for no soul. Back inside the workshop, you lay out the galls on a slate slab and start cracking them open. Some are dry and crumble easily. Others are chewy like bark jerky. One reveals a hollow center with the curled remains of a wasp inside. You stare at it for a second and whisper, "Thanks for your service, little guy." The crushed galls are surprisingly powdery. You run your fingers through the pile and feel its gritty texture. This, believe it or not, is tannin-rich dust. Tannic acid is the magical stuff here. It's what reacts with iron salts later to turn into that deep, velvety black ink. And the best part, this ink doesn't fade easily. It bonds with parchment like a clingy ex and doesn't let go. Back then, people didn't fully understand the chemistry, but they knew that ink made from oak galls lasted longer, looked darker, and felt more official. Royal scribes used it. Church scribes lived by it. Even shady forgers preferred it, which feels oddly flattering. Quirky aside, in some parts of Europe, people used oak gall dust not just for ink, but as a primitive dye for hair and even as a kind of deodorant. Imagine walking into a monastery and being hit with a double whammy of incense and gall-scented armpits. Divine. You pour the crushed gall into a clay bowl and cover it with clean water. Well, cleanish. It came from the monastery's rain barrel, which may or may not contain a drowned beetle or two. You stir it with a carved wooden stick, and the water begins to darken, slowly turning a cloudy brown. It smells vaguely metallic, like a blacksmith's breath on a humid day. Now comes the part that tests your patience and your nose. You have to let this soak. Not for minutes, not for hours, 4 days. Some recipes call for 5 days, others 2 weeks. Historians still debate whether longer soaking actually improves the ink or just makes the entire workshop smell like a damp root cellar. Either way, you'll be coming back to stir this daily, like a sad, scholarly stew. You cover the bowl with linen and place it on the high shelf near the fire, away from curious cats and careless elbows. One monk once knocked over a batch and was assigned 30 days of penance, copying Leviticus with a dull quill. You're not about to repeat his mistake. As the day winds down, you clean the stone table, sweep the floor, and jot a note on your wax tablet. Stir ink brew tomorrow. Smells questionable. Promising color. You feel oddly proud. You're not just making ink. You're making the blood of books, the fluid that will carry prayers, laws, maps, and insults for generations. It's messy, it's smelly, and it's kind of beautiful. As you head to Vespers, robes swirling around your ankles, you can't help but feel a little thrill. Who knew bugworts and oak trees held so much power? You wake up before the bell today, stirred not by holy devotion but by the lingering stench of your ink brew. The scent has crept into your straw bedding like a guilty confession, and there's no denying it now. Your oak gall potion is steeping nicely. Emphasis on steeping and smelling. You head to the workshop where the bowl sits like a forgotten casserole, a dark slurry beneath the linen cloth. You lift the covering gingerly. The smell hits you immediately: fermented bark, old vinegar, and a hint of something you can only describe as medieval. You try not to breathe through your nose. Brother Alfric appears behind you, sniffs once, and scribbles on his wax tablet. Smells like sin. Today, though, you're not just a brewer of bug ball soup. You're also a philosopher of forest products. As you stir the mixture slowly, you realize how central trees like the oak were to nearly every aspect of medieval life. Ink is just the beginning. Your sandals crunch over dry leaves as you step outside for more supplies. Trees weren't just scenery in the Middle Ages. They were the Home Depot, the pharmacy, the stationery store, and sometimes even the church. Monasteries were often built near groves of oak and beech not because they were picturesque, but because they were practical. You grab a small bundle of twigs for kindling, passing by the carpenter's shed where someone's fashioning a lectern from split oak. A monk there mutters something about needing a smoother plane, but you barely hear him. You're busy noticing how everything revolves around wood. Need a desk? Need ink? Need a coffin because you inhaled too many gall fumes? Also oak. Quirky fact of the day: medieval love potions often included bark shavings, because nothing says romance like tree dust. Back inside, you review your supplies. The galls have steeped long enough, turning the water into a rich tea of tannins and thyme. You carefully pour the liquid into a separate vessel. Try not to splash any onto your robe. Ink stains on your tunic are the medieval equivalent of texting your ex, messy and regrettable. Your next task is crucial, preparing the iron salt. This ingredient doesn't grow on trees, but it might as well be divine magic for the way it transforms your gall tea into ink. Without it, you've got nothing but dirty water and a broken dream. And guess what? Even the iron comes in part from trees. How? Through iron sulfate, often sourced from rusty nails soaked in vinegar, or from the runoff collected in old wooden barrels stored near the monastery forge. Trees again. Their shadow is everywhere in this process. You pour the mixture into an iron pot and start heating it gently over coals, using a wooden stick to stir it clockwise. Only clockwise. Why? Because Brother Alfric says so. And also because monks believe directionality affected the purity of materials. Historians still argue whether this was rooted in spiritual doctrine or just habit. You let the brew bubble slightly, watching tiny black flecks swirl to the surface. A few coughs escape your throat. Something about the combination of tannins and vinegar seems intent on clearing your sinuses permanently. You add a dash of wine to the mix. Not to celebrate, but because some recipes actually call for it. Apparently, medieval ink liked to party. Now comes the straining, but that's for later. You set the pot aside, proud of your dark brew. Your hands are stained brown at the fingertips. Your robe smells like a failed science experiment, and your stomach growls ominously. You chew a crust of rye bread and imagine life as an ancient tree, peaceful, motionless, unaware it's destined to become furniture or fuel, or this weird soup you just made. You glance at the stack of dried galls in the corner. It's wild to think how something that looks like a tree pimple is about to end up in a book that people might revere for centuries. Maybe even longer. And all from the humble, overlooked parts of nature. The bumps, the bruises, the leftovers. There's a quiet beauty in that, and a weird kind of poetry. Monks used oak galls because they worked, but they also believed they had symbolic value. The oak tree was strong, resilient. Its galls, though strange, were signs of endurance. Just like faith, the ink took time, patience, and occasionally a bug or two. You sit on a wooden stool, also oak naturally, and close your eyes. For a brief moment, you're just part of the cycle. You gather from trees, write with their essence, and leave behind words that will, maybe, outlast everything else. Somewhere in a monastery, a bell tolls for sext. Midday prayer. You sigh, wipe your stained hands on your robe, and whisper to the ink pot, "Stay put." And as you shuffle out, you can't help but marvel. Trees may not have written history, but they definitely helped you write it down. You're back at your work table, still mildly sticky from the oak gall and iron brew that's been sitting in its pot like a brooding soup. The workshop smells like wet bark and metal breath. Not the best scent to fall asleep to, but it's growing on you. Kind of like the monastery's cabbage stew, you wouldn't ask for it, but now you'd miss it if it vanished. Today's job? Straining. The medieval version of artisanal filtration. You take out a linen cloth, thin but tightly woven, and stretch it across a ceramic bowl. It's your one decent bowl, the one Brother Alaric hasn't yet used for grinding beetles or storing pickled onions. You pour the ink brew slowly. The liquid seeps through the linen like rain through a thatched roof, leaving behind the chunky bits, crushed gall fragments, stray wasp legs, probably, and weird floaters you'd rather not identify. You watch the ink collect below in thick, syrupy pools. It's dark now, rich and opaque, almost like squid ink, but somehow earthier, more ancient. This is iron gall ink in its raw, potent form. It stains everything. Your ball. Your fingers. Your soul, maybe. One drop on parchment, and it sinks in, biting into the surface like it's etching its very existence onto the world. That's why scribes loved it, and feared it a little. You dip a quill in, just the tip, mind you, and make a tentative mark on a spare parchment scrap. The line is sharp, deep black. As it dries, it oxidizes and grows even darker. A small victory. You whisper, "Yes, in a tone that might be a little too proud for someone who just made medieval sludge. Fun fact, early scribes didn't always write in black. Some preferred brown, red, or even purple inks for special texts. But iron gall, that was the serious stuff. Royal decrees, church records, and anything you didn't want fading in a year. It all got the oak gall treatment. You sit back, look at your hands, stained and a bit raw, and realize you've made something permanent, or at least as permanent as medieval technology allows. Historians still debate how long iron gall ink actually lasts. Some say 500 years. Others say it eats through parchment eventually and leaves behind nothing but ghost scribbles. Scholars are a fun bunch. You lift your bowl, careful not to slosh, and pour the finished ink into a small glass vial. It's a reused perfume bottle, probably imported ages ago, with a delicate lip and cloudy sides. Monks repurposed everything. Nothing went to waste unless it was truly cursed. Next to the vial, you place a tightly wound ball of beeswax. This will serve two purposes. One, to seal the bottle if needed, and two, to coat the inside of inkhorns. Inkhorns, those little portable containers tied to a monk's belt, were often lined with wax to keep the ink from corroding the horn and leaking all over one's habit. No one wants a black splotch on their rear during Mass. As you work, you remember how each monastery had its own take on the recipe. Some added vinegar, others used wine, a few mixed in egg whites or gum arabic for extra gloss and durability. One particularly eccentric monk added powdered bone, claiming it gave the ink the voice of the saints, or maybe he just had a thing for powdered skeletons. Either way, his notes are unreadable now, which may or may not prove his point. The workshop is silent except for the soft clink of your tools and the rhythmic scratching of a quill from the desk behind you. Brother Cuthbert is transcribing something with furious focus. Every few minutes, he grunts. You peek over his shoulder. He's copying a list of garden supplies. Monastic priorities. You clean your tools with damp cloths and pour a small test sample of the ink into a travel horn, just in case you're ever invited to a scriptorium on the road. You like to think of yourself as the medieval equivalent of a freelancer with a very niche skill set and questionable hygiene. The ink now rests in two small vials and one horn. That's maybe 3 weeks' worth, depending on how much scripture the abbot wants copied, or how many letters Brother Cuthbert sends to the nun he's definitely not corresponding with. You've seen his handwriting get suspiciously romantic. Before you leave, you gently wipe down the work table with damp cloths. The stains will remain. They always do. But the ritual of cleaning helps settle your mind. You light a bit of resin incense, pine-scented today, and let it drift upward in lazy spirals, as if the air itself is exhaling. You need that. You've just spent days transforming forest debris into historical permanence. Not bad for someone who once thought galls were just tree acne. Outside, the evening bells toll. You wrap your fingers around one of the ink vials and carry it toward the scriptorium. The hallway is cold, stone echoing beneath your steps, but the warmth of creation stays with you. You made this. From nature. From bugs. From time itself. And if you drop it, well, you don't. Because that would result in a level of punishment usually reserved for heresy or skipping morning prayers. You hold it like a baby bird made of destiny. As you open the heavy wooden door to the scriptorium, candlelight greets you. So do the tired eyes of scribes hunched over their desks. You set the vial down on the ink shelf with care and whisper, "Don't disappoint me." And with that, your day's ink-making comes to a close. But the real work, the writing, the copying, the crafting of visual prayers, that begins tomorrow. For now, you retreat to your cell, the faint scent of oak still in your sleeves, and the thought of that ink, ready to write, dancing behind your tired eyes. The scriptorium greets you with its usual blend of solemnity and shoulder pain. Candles flicker along the stone walls, each one trying its best not to be snuffed out by a wandering draft. You settle at your writing desk, oak naturally, and run your fingers across its scarred surface. Every nick and groove is a story, a mistake, a spilled thought, or maybe just someone falling asleep mid-copy, which definitely never happens. Except it absolutely does. You unwrap your quill. It's not just a feather. It's your sword, your wand, your very soul today. Goose, trimmed yesterday. You sharpened it with your penknife, also known as the monk's most dangerous possession after sass. You test the tip on a scrap of parchment. The line is crisp, the angle good. It's ready to meet ink. You unstopper the vial you filled yesterday. Still dark, still potent, still smells like forest secrets mixed with fermented iron. You give it a stir with a tiny stick. Never assume medieval materials didn't separate like a moody vinaigrette. Then you dip the quill gently and begin. The first stroke is always reverent. You form the letter tall, clean, confident. It feels like prayer, like time slowing down so you can carve one letter from air. The ink glides. It bites. It dries quickly. You keep going. B, C, D. Each letter a ritual. Each word a world. This is why monks endured aching backs and terrible lighting and the occasional rat running across the floor. Because here, at the desk, you make meaning visible. You give voice to silence. You bottle eternity, one dip of ink at a time. A soft grunt from across the room pulls your gaze. Brother Anselm is battling a stubborn tea. He's blotched the page and now stares at it like it personally insulted his mother. You mouth, try sanding it. He nods grimly and reaches for a tiny pouch of pumice. Yes, that's right. Mistakes in medieval manuscripts were fixed by abrasion. Tiny particles of ground stone, gently rubbed onto the parchment to scrape off the ink. It's basically medieval whiteout. Some scribes used breadcrumbs instead. Others just crossed things out and hoped for divine leniency. You pause to stretch your neck. The scriptorium isn't silent. It's filled with sounds that make up its own kind of chant. The scratch of quills. The sighs of men trying to stay awake. The occasional thump as someone drops a stylus. There's rhythm here, but it's not always graceful. Your scroll is almost ready for the rubricator. That's the monk who specializes in red ink, used for titles, section headings, and any parts meant to stand out. Iron gall was your standard black workhorse, but rubrics? That was a fancier beast. Often made from red ochre or cinnabar, and definitely handled with more ceremony than your humble gall brew. You look down and admire your lines. The ink has dried well. No feathering, no pooling. It's as if the words were always meant to live here, on this scraped and stretched piece of calfskin. Vellum, as it's called, isn't paper. It's animal hide, prepared through a laborious process involving soaking, scraping, stretching, and occasionally cursing. Quirky side note, some vellums still had faint hair follicles. So yes, if you tilt a page just right, you might find a ghostly cow eyebrow waving back at you. You keep writing. Psalms today. The same ones you've memorized, but each one still resonates. There's something about scribing sacred words that turns the mundane into meditation. Time blurs. Hands cramp. You blink and realize an hour has passed. Maybe two. Hard to tell. The candles are shorter now. You blow gently on a line to hasten drying. The ink, made of tree bruises and iron whispers, holds strong. No smudges. No regrets. You allow yourself a half smile, the kind that would barely qualify as emotion in the Middle Ages, but feels huge here. Historians still debate how many monks actually enjoyed this work. Some say it was a calling. Others think it was just the best alternative to digging latrines. Either way, there's no denying the care poured into every page. You glance over at the shelf where the finished books sit. Spines outward, bindings tight, pages full of dark ink and patient devotion. It hits you. This ink, this humble, messy brew from forest lumps, has outlived empires. And you helped make it. Even now, libraries hold manuscripts with lines still legible after 700 years. Some faded, some eaten by ink corrosion, but many still standing proud. as if time forgot to erase them. Because of you. Because of the ink. Brother Anselm lets out a victorious laugh. His tea has been conquered. He holds up the repaired page like a knight presenting a slain dragon. You nod approvingly. Victory by abrasion. You turn back to your own page, now nearing completion. Just a few lines left. You choose your final strokes carefully, slowing down as if to savor the moment. The last letter dries. You close the scroll. Done. You clean your quill, careful to wipe off every bit of ink before it turns crusty. A ruined quill is a ruined day. You seal the ink vial with beeswax, the way you were taught, making a tidy little lid that you know won't leak even if the abbot starts throwing things again. Then, finally, you stretch. Spine crackles. Shoulders complain. Your hands are ink-stained, your sleeves smudged, and your back feels like it's aged a decade. But your soul is smugly content. You stand, carry your finished work to the rubricator's table, and place it there with the quiet ceremony of a man laying down his burdens. Red will dance across these lines tomorrow. For now, your job is done. As you leave the scriptorium, the wind outside catches in the courtyard trees. The oaks rustle softly, like they're whispering something old, something thankful. And you think, just for a breath, that maybe they know what you've done with their galls and shadows. Your legs groan with every stone step down the hallway, but you carry the satisfaction of a finished page like a warm loaf in your hands, even though there's nothing actually in your hands. Just phantom parchment pride and a lingering scent of beeswax. The scriptorium fades behind you, its candlelight and scribbled breath tucked away until morning. You head toward the small chamber where the ink is stored long-term. It's not a glamorous room. More of a glorified cupboard, really. Low ceiling, uneven walls, always just a little too damp. But it's the monastery's treasury, in a way. Not for gold or relics, but for ink, pigments, and color that built entire books. You unlatch the wooden cabinet and pause. Inside are rows of glass and horn vials, some as big as apples, others tiny enough to fit inside a walnut shell. The inks are arranged like a weird little rainbow. Not the cheerful kind you'd see in a modern stationery store. This one has brooding blacks, rusted reds, murky browns, and the occasional jewel tone surprise. You place your latest vial of iron gall ink among its siblings. It clinks gently, nestling in like a monk finding his favorite spot in the choir stall. Here, you can't help but marvel at the sheer range. And it's not all iron gall either. Some of the vials contain elderberry ink, a dusty purple with the unfortunate tendency to mold. Others use walnut husks, producing a warm, mellow brown that seems to whisper rather than speak. One bottle is labeled verdigris, a green made from copper corrosion. It's stunning, but volatile. Handle with gloves unless you enjoy finger tingles and possible hallucinations. Quirky tidbit: one ink recipe from a 14th century manual included the instruction: urinate in a clean pot first thing in the morning, preferably your own. Yes, morning pee. Apparently, monks believed stale urine helped ferment oak galls more effectively. Whether this worked or just made your ink smell like regret is up for debate. Historians still argue whether such recipes were widespread practice or just the enthusiastic experiments of one too many bored apothecaries. You take out the ledger. Every ink added must be documented. Not just its contents, but its batch date, source materials, strength, and quirks. You scribble your entry with practiced care. Batch number 11, Gallatanic Iron Blend. Strong bite, thick finish, foresty aftertaste. Slightly too dramatic. Watch for crystallization on colder days. You close the ledger. One more page in a monastery's alchemical diary. Then comes the maintenance ritual, checking the older bottles. You lift them gently, tilt them to examine the liquid inside. Some have thickened. Others have separated into unsettling layers. You stir them with little bone-handled sticks, crafted from leftover animal scraps, because nothing here ever goes to waste. One vial has completely dried out. You open it and see a crusty little disc of black at the bottom, like a fossilized ink pancake. You say, "It happens." You add a few drops of warm wine, hoping to reconstitute it. Yes, wine. Not just for the abbot's secret stash. Turns out it's also handy for ink preservation. That's the Middle Ages for you. If it can't be solved with prayer, try wine. You reseal the vial and turn to the one ink that always unnerves you. The one labeled simply blood red. No ingredients. No notes. Just a faint metallic shimmer in the dark liquid. It's probably vermilion, a pigment made from mercury sulfide. Stunning color, dangerous as sin. Handle it too often, and you might start seeing angels or dropping dead before Vespers. You lock the cabinet again, securing your inky legacy with a humble iron clasp. Outside, the sun's dipping low, and evening prayers are about to start. You walk slowly toward the chapel, but your mind stays with the bottles behind that door. Little jars of medieval magic, or mischief, or both. During the sermon, your fingers twitch, already rehearsing tomorrow's batch. You wonder, what if you adjusted the oak to iron ratio just a smidge? Would the ink last longer? Fade slower? Would it be bolder or more brittle? Some monks seek divine revelation in scripture. You find it in pigment density and tannin extraction. Your thoughts wander further. You remember the rumor of a monastery in France where the scribes swore by spider venom ink, supposedly blacker than a starless sky. Highly unlikely. But then again, some 12th century recipes did call for burnt mouse. So never say never. After prayers, you slip out before the final chant ends. You return to your workbench, not to make more ink, but to prep for tomorrow. You gather fresh oak galls, lay them out like gems. A few are still attached to twig fragments. You leave those intact. There's something poetic about the ink remembering its tree. You grind slowly, rhythmically, each crunch a drumbeat of intent. You're not just making color. You're forging memory. These inks will hold stories, preserve ideas, carry the weight of dogma and doubt alike. A monk's ink doesn't just stain parchment. It defies time. As the last light leaves the sky, you light a single beeswax candle. Its glow dances across the stone wall, throwing shadows that look like half-finished letters. You sit back, exhale, and let your mind settle into the silence. Tomorrow you'll brew. Tomorrow you'll write. Tonight you remember. The cold of the room sinks into your robes, but you don't shiver. You're used to it. This place, these smells, this slow work, it's not glamorous, but it's real. And it's yours. And somewhere, centuries from now, someone will read a line written in your ink, and they'll wonder who made it. Who ground the galls? Who stirred the iron? Who dared to try urine fermentation? They won't know your name, but they'll read your legacy. And that's kind of enough. The rooster is screaming again. You think after a lifetime of monastic order, you grow used to being startled awake by a bird that sounds like it swallowed a bagpipe and regrets everything. But no, every morning it still wins. You groan, stretch, and mentally review the day ahead. You've got one mission: brew the perfect batch of ink. You shuffle out of bed, robes clinging in the chill. Outside your cell, the corridor echoes with slippered footsteps and the occasional cough, the dawn orchestra of monastic life. You skip breakfast, not out of piety, but because porridge is on rotation today, and last time it had the texture of soggy rope. Your stomach will forgive you once the tannins hit. In the courtyard, the morning fog is thick enough to hide the lower parts of the oaks. You can still smell them, though green and sharp, damp and ancient. You cross over to the apothecary chamber, your unofficial sanctuary. It's lined with shelves of labeled jars, bundles of drying herbs, and mysterious lumps that may or may not be expired gallstones. You start by preparing your gall infusion. Yesterday's ground galls are now soaking in water, dark, cloudy, rich with tannins. You give the bowl a swirl. The surface trembles like a scrying pool. The scent is stronger today, more assertive. Slightly sour, slightly woody. You approve. Next comes the iron sulfate. Your batch is dry and clumpy, stored in a stoppered ceramic jar, so it doesn't leach its ghostly gray dust into everything else. You measure it out carefully. This part has to be precise. Too little, and ink goes weak. Too much, and it eats through the parchment like an angry termite. You heat a pot over a small brazier. The room fills with soft clinks and gentle bubbles. The infusion steams gently. You add the iron slowly. As it touches the liquid, the color shifts dramatically, from muddy brown to a deep, inky blue-black. You watch mesmerized. It never gets old. Historians still argue whether the exact chemistry behind gall ink was fully understood by medieval ink makers. Did they realize they were triggering a molecular reaction between tannic acid and iron salts, forming ferrous tannate? Or were they just happy that it stuck to things and looked fancy? Maybe both. Maybe neither. After all, when your worldview includes dragons, everything's on the table. As the ink darkens, you toss in a pinch of gum arabic. It comes from acacia tree sap, dried into amber-like tears that you crush with a mortar and pestle. It's the unsung hero of ink making, your binder, your flow smoother, your keep this from turning into soup overnight ingredient. Without it, your ink would feather out across the page like a drunk spider. With it, every line stays crisp. You stir the mixture with a wooden rod. The consistency is smooth, almost like melted chocolate. You test it by dipping a reed pen into the pot and drawing a quick loop on scrap parchment. The line goes down gray. Wait for it. Wait, then darkens almost magically as it oxidizes. That's the sweet spot. You pour the ink into a clean glass vial while it's still warm. The funnel gurgles. The scent of the ink is earthy, metallic, slightly acrid. It smells like forest secrets and alchemy. You seal the vial with beeswax and wrap it in linen to cool slowly. Another one for the shelf. Another chapter waiting to be written. You're about to clean up when Brother Petrus barges in, breathing hard and holding a broken stylus like it's a snapped femur. "Emergency," he gasps. "Abbott wants new ink. Decorative. For the Easter margins. Blue. With sparkle." You blink. Sparkle? What does he think this is, the 13th century version of glitter glue? Still, you nod and reach for your special shelf. This is where things get weird, in the best way. You pull out a jar of lapis lazuli. It's not actually ink. Not yet. Just powder. Precious, vivid, mined from Afghanistan, traded across continents like a shimmering passport. Ground for hours into ultramarine pigment. To make it into ink, you'll need a binder. Egg white, maybe. Or glare, whipped and strained whites left to settle. You don't have any on hand, so you crack an egg into a bowl, whisk like a tiny storm, and leave it to rest while you prep the pigment. Grinding lapis lazuli is the medieval version of playing God. You mix the blue dust with a drop of honey and a smidge of linseed oil to keep it from flying into your nose, which, yes, has happened before, and yes, you sneeze blue for 2 days. Then you spoon it into a pestle and grind. The sound is oddly soothing. Stone against stone. A rasping lullaby. Your hands move on autopilot. You could do this in your sleep. Some monks practically did. Eventually, the pigment is fine enough. You strain the glare and combine it with a powder until it becomes a silky blue goo. It's beautiful. Deep ocean. Midnight sky. The kind of color angels might wear if angels were into fashion statements. You pour the ultramarine ink into a tiny ceramic pot. No need for a whole vial. This is for accents, initials, margins, flourishes. You hand it to Petrus with a warning. Use sparingly. This pot is worth more than your sandals. He nods solemnly and vanishes. As you clean up the pigment trail left across your workbench like the aftermath of a fairy rave, you pause to admire your regular gall ink again. It may not sparkle, it may not stun, but it lasts. That's the real power of oak and iron. It's staying power. Quirky fact before you go. Some scribes would write with invisible ink, lemon juice, or diluted vinegar, and then heat the page to make the writing appear. Secret messages, hidden corrections, or just monthly mischief. No one really knows how widespread it was, but adds a mischievous layer to an otherwise painfully meticulous job. You finish washing your tools, laying them out on a cloth to dry. The sun's now streaming through the high window, warming the stone floor. It's almost noon. Time for prayers. You leave the room with ink on your fingers and a tiny blue smear on your cheek you'll forget to notice until Compline. But you feel good. Because today you didn't just make ink. You made memory. You made magic. And tomorrow someone will put it to parchment, and the world will get just a little more legible. The midday bell tolls, echoing through stone and sky, and you feel it more than hear it, like a nudge from the universe reminding you that silence is optional, but punctuality is mandatory. You brush flecks of dried pigment from your robe and shuffle toward the cloister walk, where drowsy sunlight pools between the columns. But as usual, you're not thinking about prayers. You're thinking about parchment. Because no matter how perfect your ink is, it means nothing without a proper surface to hold it. And parchment, dear listener, is not paper. It's animal skin. Literally. As in, sorry, little goat, but you're about to become a page in someone's sermon. You duck into the parchmenter's chamber, which is half workshop, half medieval horror show. Stretched animal skins hang taut on wooden frames, looking like ghostly trampolines. The smell is unmistakable, sharp, pungent, a mix of lime, hide, and centuries of reluctant gratitude. This is where raw skins are transformed into writing gold. It starts with soaking. Fresh hides, usually from sheep or goats, occasionally calves, are soaked in lime water for days, loosening the hair and fat. A job so smelly and soggy, it was often passed off to lay workers or the monastery's most junior novices. You remember your own turn vividly, mostly because you couldn't eat cheese for weeks afterward. Once the soaking's done, the scraping begins. The hide is stretched over a wooden frame called hearse, then worked over with a curved blade. Every stroke peels away hair, fat, and the outer layer of skin. It's messy, it's painstaking, and it's entirely necessary. Get lazy, and you'll end up with blotchy parchment that sucks in ink like a sponge and bleeds letters until your illuminated men looks like it sobbed through Lent. You run your hand along one of the drying hides. It's smooth now, pale and slightly translucent. You can see faint traces of veins in the right light, like a ghost map of the animal's past. Some scribes love that. Others find it unsettling. Historians still argue whether imperfections in parchment were seen as flaws or reminders of God's natural design. There's also the matter of sides. You've got the hair side, usually darker, with a subtle grain from the follicles, and the flesh side paler, smoother. Most monks preferred to write on the flesh side, but some didn't mind the occasional hair ghost popping up mid-sentence. The finished sheets are trimmed and stacked, ready to become quires. That's the fancy medieval term for a folded gathering of parchment sheets, which eventually gets sewn together to form a codex, aka a book. But before that can happen, each sheet has to be ruled. Not with a ruler, but with a piece of lead or a thin stylus, and if you're especially ambitious, a compass and square. Yes, even monks had geometry trauma. You glance over at a pile of misruled sheets. Too few lines. Too many. Crooked margins. One is a doodle of what might be a bored saint or a particularly grumpy sheep. You smirk. Every monastery had at least one scribe who rebelled with doodles. Quirky fact, in some surviving manuscripts, you can find tiny caricatures of fellow monks, marginal squirrels, or even passive-aggressive commentary like, "This is a terrible pen," or "The weather is foul." Proof that even in sacred script, sarcasm survives. You take a sheet to the light and hold it up. It's beautiful, thin but strong, flexible yet firm, and expensive. One full book could take hundreds of animals' worth of parchment. It's why scribes often recycled old manuscripts, scraping off the ink and writing anew. These are called palimpsests, and some hold layers of hidden history, waiting to be uncovered centuries later by puzzled scholars with UV lights and magnifying tools. Of course, the ink you use on this surface must behave. If it's too acidic, it eats through the parchment. If it's too runny, it feathers and stains. That's why you've developed a habit of testing every batch on a scrap of hide before writing anything important. You dip your pen and draw a long, slow line. It glides cleanly. No spreading. No flaking. You smile. You think of all the hands that touched this sheet before it got to you. The shepherd, the butcher, the tanner, the parchmenter. Every page is a collaboration. A slow, silent chorus of labor behind each letter you'll eventually inscribe. And then there's the sound. That soft, dry rustle parchment makes as you turn it. Nothing like paper. It's thicker, more resonant, almost like the sigh of an old book reliving its youth. A sound you've come to associate with reverence. You gather a few sheets and bring them to your work table. On the way, you pass Brother Anselm, who's still trying to trim the edges of a stubborn hide. He looks like he's lost a duel with a sheep ghost. You nod solemnly. No words are needed. The struggle is universal. At your desk, you carefully fold and stack the sheets into a fresh quire. This one will hold psalms and maybe a few commentaries. You run your finger down the center, where the fold creases. You imagine the monk will read these words a century from now, tracing the same line with reverent hands. Open scholarly debate. Some experts believe parchment replaced papyrus in Europe purely because it was more durable and easier to produce locally. Others argue it had symbolic significance. Being made from sacrificed flesh, it carried an almost sacramental weight. The truth? Probably a little of both. But you don't care much about the theory. You just know this stuff holds ink like a dream. The sun has moved across the sky now, casting long shadows through the arches. You gather your tools, clean your blade, and cover the remaining sheets with linen. Parchment doesn't like drafts, or sunlight, or humidity, or monks with greasy fingers. You exit the workshop with that particular kind of satisfaction that only comes from scraping animal hides until your wrists feel like pudding. And yet, you wouldn't trade it. Because when your ink meets this surface, when your pen dances across a page that once grazed a hillside, it feels like you're building a bridge between worlds. Flesh and word. Nature and meaning. And tomorrow you'll write. But tonight, you rest, with the smell of lime water still faint on your robes and the ghosts of goats whispering from your sleeves. You wake in the dim hours before dawn again, groggy groaning, with the taste of last night's parsnip stew still haunting your molars. But this morning feels different. There's a quiet weight to the air, like the whole monastery is holding its breath. Today, you're not just preparing ink or trimming parchment. Today, you're scribing. You pad down the hallway, past sleeping cells and flickering oil lamps, and into the scriptorium. It's still dark inside, save for few candle flames licking the walls. The room smells like beeswax and old vellum. Every desk has its tools, reed pens resting like miniature spears, small knives for scraping mistakes, ink pots lined up like sleepy sentinels. You sit at your assigned spot and place your folded quire in front of you like an altar offering. Before writing, there's the ritual. Not just prayer, though of course there's that too. But there's also the fussy, sacred prep work. Sharpening your pen, testing the nib, checking the flow of ink. You dip the pen and test it on a corner of scrap parchment. Just a small loop, a line, a flick. The ink dries beautifully. No bleed. Crisp edges. The nib sings against the skin like a brush dragged over silk. You breathe in deeply. Now you begin. You write slowly, slower than anyone today would believe. Each letter crafted like a miniature sculpture. A Latin script called Carolingian minuscule is your hand of choice. It's clean, easy to read, and blessedly forgiving when you're running on 2 hours of sleep and monk-rate anxiety. Developed under Charlemagne's empire, it brought consistency to European script. Historians still argue whether it was truly a leap in literacy or just imperial micromanagement in calligraphic form. Regardless, it's a joy to write. The curves are elegant, the spacing generous. You shape each letter like it's a living thing. Pax peace. The first word on the page, and already your hand is cramping like a dried fig. The margins are ruled faintly in lead point, your guide rails. You stay between them religiously, pun intended. No drifting letters, no rogue flourishes. You imagine God frowning from above, quill in one hand, grading your penmanship like a heavenly schoolmaster. Still, mistakes happen. Blot here, a skipped letter there. You pause, sigh, and pull out your penknife. With a gentle scrape, you lift the dried ink from the parchment, like erasing a tiny shadow. The surface roughens slightly, but it's nothing a little burnishing can't fix. You rub it with the flat of your knife handle until it shines again, like the mistake was never there. Medieval undo button activated. The hours melt away. Light shifts. A shaft of sun creeps across your work table, illuminating the growing lines of text. Your back protests. Your neck has turned into a stone pillar. You take a break. You rise and stretch, and your eyes wander to Brother Matthew a few desks away. He's working on a more elaborate commission, a gospel maybe. His margins sparkle with gold leaf. You watch as he uses a squirrel hair brush to apply adhesive, then carefully presses a thin sheet of gold onto the design. It clings instantly, glowing like a captured star. Quirky fact, gold leaf is so thin, it can float on air. Monks learned early on to hold their breath while applying it. One misplaced exhale, and your entire budget for the week floats into oblivion. The work is tense, glittery, and strangely beautiful. You wander over for a closer look. The gold catches the light and seems to shimmer with a mind of its own. And there, just in the corner of the page, he's hidden a tiny creature. A grinning cat in bishop robes, raising one paw in blessing. Illuminators did that sometimes. Snuck in a joke, a wink, a piece of themselves. They knew most readers wouldn't notice, but it made the page theirs. Back at your own desk, you resume. The next section is tricky, a genealogy passage with endless begots and unfamiliar names that twist your tongue even in silence. You trudge on, each name a pebble in your boot. Your pen scratches steadily, rhythmically, like a beetle tap dancing across the hide. Lunch comes and goes. Cold bread, warm broth, a few dried figs if you're lucky. You eat in silence, your mind still half in the manuscript. One of the younger monks spills water across a table, and a senior brother yelps as the ink runs across his margin like a startled spider. He rushes to blot it with sand. Yes, actual sand. It's an old trick. Dust the ink, let it soak. You've used it yourself, especially when in a hurry. You return to your seat. Only a few lines left in the choir. You check the alignment, admire the curve of a particularly elegant G. It's the kind of moment that no one else will ever notice, but to you, it feels like applause. You finish with a flourish and lean back. Your choir is complete. You stretch your fingers and look down at the freshly inked page. It gleams faintly in the afternoon light. Not a masterpiece, perhaps, but clean, clear, and alive. Scholars debate whether most medieval scribes thought of their work as art or duty. The truth is, it was both. It was devotion made visible. And while many pages were copied for utility, laws, sermons, saints' lives, others were copied simply to preserve beauty. Ink on parchment wasn't just text. It was memory, intention, and love pressed into time. You set your choir aside to dry, and for a moment, you allow yourself to bask in the rare satisfaction of a job well done. Not because it's finished, but because it was done right. Outside, the bells chime for vespers. The candlelight flickers low. You gather your tools, wipe your nibs, and whisper a brief thanks to Saint Isidore, patron saint of scribes and perhaps the only soul who understands how exhausting it is to accidentally sneeze on sacred text. As you blow out your candle, the scriptorium settles into dusk. Faint gold glows from a half-finished border. Ink dries quietly on the page, and the words you wrote, carefully, lovingly, begin their long journey across the centuries. Your back is sore, your fingers ink-stained and stiff, and yet there's something about a completed choir that feels like a small triumph. But no rest yet, because now comes the phase that makes your tidy rows of letters sing, illumination. You're not the artist, not really. That job belongs to Brother Odo, who smells perpetually of glue and who once accidentally gilded his own eyebrows. But as the scribe, you're responsible for preparing the handoff. That means leaving space for his artistry, deliberate gaps in the margins, oversized initials, room for borders to bloom. You glance at your freshly dried choir. It's ready for Odo and his paints, derived from things that should not be paint. You've seen the alchemy firsthand. The pigment cupboard is a cramped, moody room where toxic minerals mingle with insect carcasses and the smell of vinegar hangs like judgment. Let's talk colors, shall we? Blue, real, heavenly, a watering blue, comes from lapis lazuli, a stone mined in Afghanistan, then shipped at great expense through long, perilous routes. Grinding, it is a labor of days. It's rare, it's precious, and it's so expensive that monks often label the blue pigment pots with prayers. You remember hearing one brother mutter, "May I not sneeze during the grinding?" like it was a legitimate petition. Red comes from cinnabar, a mercury-based mineral that whispers sweet, poisonous lullabies into the lungs of anyone who grinds it too enthusiastically. Cheaper reds come from madder root, boiled and fussed over like soup you can't eat. Yellow? That might be saffron, if you're lucky. Orpiment, if you're not, which is beautiful, but also a powdered punch of arsenic. The phrase, beauty is pain, feels alarmingly literal here. Then there's green, notoriously temperamental. It can come from verdigris, copper acetate, basically rust scraped from old bronze. It's bright, yes, but acidic. Leave it alone too long and it eats through the page like a medieval Pac-Man. Historians still argue whether monks used it despite the risks out of ignorance or because they simply couldn't resist that vibrant glow. And gold. Oh, the gold. Actual gold, beaten so thin it flutters like breath. Laid down with gesso or egg white glue. Buffed until it glows brighter than candlelight. It's not just decoration. It's a spiritual flex. The words of God, wrapped in light. You follow Brother Odo into the illuminator's corner, where scrolls and sketches litter every surface. He's halfway through an initial bee that's become a universe. Curling vines, miniature beasts, a bishop's mitre on a passing snail. He gestures with a tiny brush, flicking cerulean droplets onto his robes. You suspect he hasn't blinked in 20 minutes. There's method to his madness. First, he outlines the design in ink, careful, light strokes. Then comes the gilding, applied in small, deliberate patches. It needs time to set. He dabs it with his breath, warm, gentle, then rubs with a tooth of dog or fox until it gleams like treasure. Finally, he layers in color, one brushstroke at a time, like a prayer whispered across a rainbow. You ask him about his favorite pigment. He grins and holds up a small pot of red. Dragon's blood, he says. Not literally, of course. It's resin from the rattan palm, but tell that to the romantic in him. You nod sagely. You once tried to name a brown ink phoenix toenail just to see if anyone would flinch. There's a quirkiness to it all. Some illuminators left visual jokes, men fighting snails, rabbits jousting, monks mooning from towers. Medieval marginalia is weird, wonderful, and often deeply confusing. Were they bored? Rebellious? Or just embracing whimsy within a world of rigid lines? Scholars debate endlessly. You just know that when you spot a nun playing bagpipes on the edge of a psalter, your day improves significantly. Your own role during illumination isn't passive. You help prep the parchment, burnishing the surface, repairing any tears with stretched thread or parchment patches. You handle logistics too. Paint needs eggs, glue, vinegar. You once had to barter 3 onions for a thimble of gum arabic. True story. Quirky fact. Sometimes pages were illuminated before the scribe added text. Other times, text came first. There's no single formula. And yes, historians still argue about which came first. Like a very nerdy chicken and egg debate, but with more gold leaf and fewer yolks. One of your favorite moments? Watching the illumination emerge from the background, when dull outlines begin to shimmer, when flat borders blossom into vines and saints, when the page goes from parchment to portal. You understand now why some monks spent months on a single book. It wasn't just copying words. It was capturing wonder. You help Odo lay the finished page flat to dry. It catches the fading light. The blues smolder, the gold sings, the reds hum like embers. You think of the reader who will one day open this book. Maybe in another monastery. Maybe another century. Maybe they'll marvel. Maybe they'll snort at the frog in a tunic hidden in the corner. Either way, your work, this fusion of ink and pigment, letter and light, will greet them across time. As evening falls, the scriptorium shifts again. Illuminated pages are set aside, safe under linen. Pigment pots are sealed. Brushes are washed somewhat. Odo begins muttering to himself in Latin, which is either a prayer or an insult to vermilion, you're not sure. You clean your own desk, pausing to admire the margin space you left, a little wider than needed. Room to breathe, or room for Odo to slip in another sword-wielding hedgehog. One never knows. Before you leave, you glance back at the page you helped shape. The illumination glows even in low light. It's not just decoration. It's delight, devotion, defiance, all mixed with a bit of powdered beetle and actual medieval sweat. And somehow that feels like a fair trade. You wake the next morning with the stiffness of someone twice your age and the mild despair of someone whose robe still smells faintly of vinegar and fox glue. But your task today is a welcome shift. No scribing, no gilding, just reviewing. You'll be poring over completed pages, quire by quire, to check for errors and make sure the script aligns with the master text. You think this will be relaxing. It is not. The review table is a long, creaky slab of oak beneath a narrow, clear-story window, which means you're lit like a saint in a stained glass panel, but slowly baking under the sun. In front of you lies a neat stack of completed quires, pages already written, sometimes illuminated, and now awaiting final scrutiny before binding. You're armed with a magnifying lens, a faintly judgmental candle, and a deep desire not to find any mistakes because, frankly, corrections are a nightmare. You open the first quire. It begins well. Clean script, even ruling, sensible spacing. The Latin flows. Your fellow scribe has a fine hand, if a little fond of overlooping his DS. You mark a quiet check in the margin. Not with ink, never with ink, but with a sliver of wax or a thread of colored linen. Temporary markers, gentle as whispers. Then 3 lines down, you spot it Patrice spelled as Patrice. You say, that's not just a typo, it's a theological curveball. One's the Father, the other is Peter. You note it. This will need scraping, careful rewriting, and potentially some kneeling repentance. Scribes made mistakes. Of course they did. Copying for hours, eyes strained, minds wandering. It was inevitable. Some fixed them expertly. Others left marginal notes begging forgiveness. Scripsi et corrigi volui. I wrote it, and I wanted to correct it. You once saw a note that just said, "Oh Lord, help me," in the margin, as if the monk had just given up entirely. Quirky tidbit, one 13th century scribe added this gem to the bottom of a manuscript. Now I've written the whole thing. For Christ's sake, give me a drink. You feel that in your soul. As you turn the page, your eye catches a faint smudge where the ink was too wet. probably from a rushed scribe who leaned his sleeve into the margin. The text is still readable, barely. But your job isn't to excuse errors. It's to catch them before the book moves on to its next phase. And it's not just textual mistakes. You check alignment too. The text block should sit squarely within the frame, hugging its ruled lines. A page that drifts becomes problematic in the binding process. A text line too close to the inner gutter could vanish into the fold. You flip to a new quire. This one's more challenging. The scribe is written in an older hand, a hybrid Gothic that's all spiky limbs and compact curves. It's harder to read, like trying to decipher a hedgehog's autograph. You squint and trace the sentences slowly. The content is a sermon from St. Bernard, full of long-winded metaphors involving sheep and divine light. Halfway through, your mind drifts to last week's lunch. You snap yourself back with a shake of the head and another sip of watered-down wine. You catch another error, this one subtle. A line repeated. The same sentence appears twice, copied out of habit. It happens. When your eyes flit from the original to your parchment and back again for the 100th time, it's easy to misplace your spot. The medieval term is I skip. Very common, very annoying. There's some debate among scholars over how standardized this checking process really was. Did all monasteries apply the same level of scrutiny? Or was it more relaxed in smaller houses with fewer resources? The answer seems to vary. Some books are pristine. Others look like they were proofread by someone with a chicken perched on their shoulder. You glance at the illuminations next. Marginalia intact, gilding clean, no flaking. You lightly rub the page with a cotton cloth to ensure no loose pigment remains. Once a novice turned a page too fast and launched gold dust into his neighbor's soup. He sparkled for days. Lesson learned. Sometimes, if a mistake can't be erased, a scribe will write around it. You've seen creative solutions, words squeezed into margins, tiny carrot marks dancing above the lines, even blank spaces left for a supervisor to puzzle over. One page you reviewed had a drawing of a donkey with the Latin phrase, hic est error. Here is the error, scrawled underneath. Honesty is the best policy, apparently. You finally finish the stack. Your notes are minimal, your corrections few. That's a blessing. The fewer the changes, the smoother the binding process will go. You gather your marked pages and deliver them to Brother Hervius, who handles final corrections. He accepts them with a grunt and a nod, already dipping his knife in preparation. His desk smells of powdered pumice and judgment. Now you return to the review bench for one last quire, a new arrival from a distant priory. The script is unfamiliar, but precise. You admire its balance, its restraint. Then, in the bottom margin, you notice something odd, a single, tiny illustration, a mouse with a halo holding a quill. You blink. It's delicate, almost reverent. Someone's joke, perhaps. Or a secret tribute to the tireless scribes who labor in silence. You smile and close the quire gently, deciding to leave that one untouched. The sun has shifted by now. Light beams stretch long across the room, gilding your desk in a glow that rivals Brother Odo's finest borders. You stretch your back, yawn deeply, and feel the warm pride of someone who's guarded the legacy of words, even if just for a day. You stack your tools, extinguish the candle, and walk the quiet corridor back to your cell. Your eyes are tired, yes, but your mind, still filled with illuminated mice wrote Patrice, and that one page where St. Bernard looked suspiciously like your abbot. Another day, another chapter reviewed. Tomorrow, maybe you'll bind. The morning air bites a little sharper today, like parchment cooled in a drafty hall. You clutch your robe tighter as you make your way to the bindery, a quieter corner of the monastery, where the thump of the hammer is more common than the scratch of a quill. You're here to witness the final act of the manuscript's long transformation, the binding. You arrive to find Brother Anselm already at work. He's a mountain of a man with surprisingly delicate hands, each finger permanently stained with glue and leather dye. He's muttering something about a misaligned spine, and from the way he glares at a stack of quires, you suspect it's not his own. Today's task? Gathering the completed, corrected quires, sewing them into a single book, and clothing them in something durable. Leather, typically, sometimes reinforced with wooden boards. You won't be doing the binding yourself. This is Anselm's domain. But you're there to assist, observe, and maybe not breathe too hard near the glue pot. You start by organizing quires, each folded set of pages aligned and stacked in order. One misstep here, a swapped quire, an inverted leaf, and the entire gospel might mislead someone into believing Lazarus rose before he died. It's happened. There's a famously garbled psalter where the Ten Commandments appear after the plagues. Dramatic, yes, but theologically problematic. Once the quires are checked and aligned, Anselm begins piercing tiny holes down the central folds. These are for the cords, usually made from linen or hemp, which will hold the entire book together. The cords themselves are anchored to a wooden frame, strung taut like a harp. Anselm threads each quire through in sequence, sewing them tightly around the cords with a curved needle, binding them into a single, flexible block. You watch fascinated. The rhythm of his stitching is calming, almost hypnotic. Over-under, loop and pull, not and snug. The quires stack up, neat and crisp. It's like watching a medieval spine being born. Quirky fact, some monks used catgut for sewing, yes, actual animal intestines. Durable, and let's call it memorable in scent. Anselm thankfully prefers flax. Now comes the glue, animal-based, boiled down from hides and bones, thick as syrup and twice as sticky. The smell, however, is less pleasant, somewhere between damp wool and eternal regret. You help hold the book block as Anselm brushes the spine with a warm glue, pressing it firmly, then wrapping it with linen for extra strength. You ask him if he's ever glued his fingers together. He lifts one brow and silently holds up a thumb with a permanent ridge. Message received. Once the glue sets, it's time to attach the covers. These are wooden boards, often beech or oak, plain smooth and cut to size. The cords from the spine are threaded through holes in the boards and pegged tightly, anchoring the book like a ship's mast to its deck. You can see the muscle in Anselm's forearms as he works. Binding a book isn't gentle, it's structural engineering with a side of theology. Historians still argue whether medieval bindings were more functional than decorative, or vice versa. Truth is, it depends. Some books were simple and rugged, designed to survive 1,000 readings. Others were ornate, draped in velvet, encrusted with jewels, even fitted with clasps and locks. This one you're working on. Modest, but sturdy. A monk's daily devotional, not a king's showpiece. The boards are wrapped in leather, usually calfskin, known as limp vellum when left unbacked. Anselm softens it with a mix of wax and oil, then stretches it over the boards, pulling it snug as a drum. He presses the corners with a heated iron, embossing a subtle pattern, crosses and circles, simple but meaningful. You help trim the edges, snipping tiny slits so the leather folds cleanly over the spine. Then come the metal fittings, clasps to keep the book shut tight against moisture and warping. Without them, parchment pages can curl like dried leaves. Some books had chains too, linked to library desks in a kind of holy house arrest. Monks weren't above walking off with a particularly beautiful psalter, after all. You run your hand along the spine. It's smooth, firm, surprisingly heavy. The book breathes differently now. It's no longer a stack of fluttering sheets. It has presence. It feels finished. Anselm hands it to you carefully. Don't drop it, he says, and you're not sure if it's a joke or a warning. Either way, you cradle the book like a relic. It smells of leather, glue, and just a whisper of lapis. You can almost hear the hours trapped between the pages, the scribes muttering Latin, the illuminators whispering to their gold leaf, the endless, rhythmic scraping of pen on skin. You help set the bound book underweight, a heavy press with smooth boards that will flatten it overnight. Tomorrow, it'll be ready for use. or for storage in the library's wall of niches, each book nestled like a sleeping saint in stone. You pause before leaving the bindery. There's a soft pride curling in your chest. You didn't write every page or paint every border or stitch every seam, but you were part of its making. And that counts. This book, this durable bundle of ink and effort, might outlive you by centuries. As you walk back through the cloister, you pass the scriptorium window and see a novice bent over a fresh sheet, tongue caught between his teeth, just beginning the first line of the next volume. It never ends, you think. And that's the point. By now, you know the rhythm of this place. The scratch of quills, the clang of bells, the faint waft of boiled parchment and beeswax. But there's another layer to your monastic world, one less visible, but just as vital. Tonight, we explore where these precious volumes go. Once the book is bound, ink dried, and leather fitted tight, it's time for storage and a bit of medieval library science. You begin the morning with a bundle cradled in your arms, a freshly bound manuscript, still warm from the press, still heavy with the weight of effort. You tread carefully because this book is now considered sacred. Not in the divine sense, though it might contain scripture, but in the don't you dare drop it sense. The monastery's library isn't quite what you'd imagine. No sweeping halls with ladders on wheels. No golden lamps swinging from high vaults. It's more of a stone-walled chamber tucked above the chapter house, reached by a narrow spiral stair, so cramped you must shuffle sideways with a manuscript held above your head like a bread loaf. Inside, the room breathes differently, cooler, stiller. The shelves are built into the walls, deep stone niches stacked with volumes like sleeping cats. Some rest flat, some stand upright. All are chained. Yes, chained. Not for punishment. For security. These books are precious, months or years in the making, crafted from costly materials. Losing one to a wandering pilgrim or an overly curious student would be like misplacing a cathedral's roof. So many monasteries, especially in England and Italy, employed chained libraries. A short iron chain linked the book's spine to a bar, long enough to let you read at the desk, but never to walk out the door. The desk itself is worn smooth by decades of elbows and the slow erosion of fingertips flipping pages. You lay the new manuscript down reverently, and Brother Julian, the librarian, nods with mild approval, his version of thunderous applause. Julian's job is part monk, part detective. He keeps the library's catalog, a thick folio containing short entries, sometimes just the title and author, sometimes elaborate descriptions like, "The book with red leather and a gold, shaped like a beetle." Accurate, dubious, helpful, only if you like beetles. There's still debate among historians about how standardized these catalogs were. Some monasteries used detailed shelf lists, others scribbled notes in fly-leaves. At Exeter Cathedral, a 14th century list survived that reads like a medieval Dewey Decimal System, but also mentions the book Brother Cedric borrowed and never returned. Passive-aggressive documentation is timeless. Julian enters the manuscript into the catalog. It's a collection of sermons. He abbreviates the title and notes its condition, contents, and binding. You ask him if it will ever be lent out. He snorts. Only to a bishop. Or God. And only if they return it within the fortnight. Quirky aside, in one 12th century manuscript, the book's owner inscribed a warning. Whoever steals this book, may he die the death. May he be fried in a pan. May the falling sickness and fever seize him. You're not sure if it worked, but you're also not about to test it. You look around at the other volumes. Some are ancient Carolingian script, covers patched with linen. Others are newer, painted with vibrant colors that haven't faded despite the centuries. Many have book plates, early ex libris notes marking the donor or the scriptor who completed them. One says proudly, "By Brother Hugo, who had sore eyes and wrote this in the year of our Lord 1264. You can't help but admire the strange architecture of knowledge in this room. Books are grouped by subject: theology, law, natural philosophy, lives of saints. But some have wandered over time. You find a text on animal husbandry, next to a hymnal. You imagine a monk humming a psalm while learning how to castrate a goat. Each book has a personality. One is a clasp shaped like a serpent. Another smells faintly of rose oil, probably stored too close to the apothecary's experiments. And one massive antiphonary, too large for a single monk to lift, sits open on a slanted podium, its pages turned with a stick during choir practice. You help Julian reshelve a few tomes. He teaches you the placement system, which involves a combination of shelf order, spine tags, and what he calls monastic memory. It works surprisingly well, until you realize that if Julian catches a cold and forgets where he put something, the monastery could lose St. Augustine's Confessions forever. Before you leave, Julian shows you a hidden niche in the wall behind a false panel. It contains the monastery's rarest texts, illuminated psalters, a Greek gospel, even a crumbling manuscript written on purple-dyed parchment with silver ink. He lets you hold it carefully with gloves, as though touching an angel's whisper. It's delicate, barely legible, and unbelievably precious. As you walk back down the spiral stairs, you think about how far that one manuscript traveled, from oak gall to ink, from script to binding, now locked in stone and iron. And this is only one book. Imagine a world full of them, each crafted by hand, each a vessel of thought, prayer, history. Not every monastery had such a library. Some had a few dozen books. Others, like the one at Cluny or Monte Cassino, boasted hundreds. And all of them knew to preserve a book was to preserve the soul of a people, a culture, a faith. Back in the scriptorium, a novice holds up a page too close to the light, accidentally setting it smoking near a candle. You rush forward, batting the flame out with your sleeve. The parchment is scorched but not lost. The book lives on. Lesson learned: never underestimate the flammability of history. Evening falls like a velvet curtain, and the monastery grows quiet, less bustling, more contemplative. Candlelight flickers in narrow windows. In the cloister, someone chants softly under their breath. You've spent so much time in the scriptorium, at the vat, in the bindery, and even in the library's hidden alcoves, but you haven't yet followed the life of a book after it's shelved. Because books in a medieval monastery don't just gather dust. They breathe through use. Tonight, you shadow the sacred side of the manuscript's journey, how these works are read, sung, studied, and even debated by the monks they were made for. You follow Brother Martin to the chapter house just before matins. He's carrying a psalter worn at the edges, bound in simple leather, the kind of book that's been read thousands of times and still opens like it knows where to fall. He doesn't walk fast. No need. The liturgy runs on divine time. He settles into his wooden stall as the others arrive. The manuscript is propped on a slanted stand, and you can see the careful calligraphy by lamplight. The letters are slightly faded, the ink brown with age. Not the bright black of new oak gall, but something gentler, like it's slowly sinking into the parchment. The choir begins, and the psalter comes alive. The chant flows across the room, rising and falling in waves. The neumes, those square musical notations added above the text, guide each voice. You hadn't noticed them before, how subtle they are. Not quite sheet music, not quite suggestion. More like the memory of a melody in ink. Mainstream historical fact: Gregorian chant, though now synonymous with this kind of monastic singing, wasn't standardized until centuries after it first appeared. What you're hearing might be an ancestor to it, local, fluid, unique to this monastery. The rhythm is free, almost floating. Martin flips the pages carefully, not by hand, but using the edge of his sleeve. He doesn't want to leave oil on the parchment. You catch a glance at the marginalia, tiny notes from earlier monks. Some are practical. Repeat this line 3 times during Easter. Others are more personal. One reads, Brother Hildebrand sings flat when tired. There's a tiny frowning face doodled beside it. Once the service ends, the monks file out quietly, and Martin stays behind to tidy the manuscript, folding a protective cloth over it. You ask him if he has a favorite psalm. He smiles and quotes softly, My tongue is the pen of a ready writer. You feel that one in your ribs. Later that night, in the refectory, another kind of manuscript makes an appearance. This one's not sung, it's read. A younger monk stands behind a wooden pulpit, holding a book of sermons. While the others eat in silence, he recites slowly, with a kind of cadence that leaves time for digestion, both literal and spiritual. The book's voice becomes part of the rhythm of mealtime. One mouthful of lentils, one line about humility, a crust of bread, a tale of St. Jerome and his temper. The monks nod along, chewing and reflecting. The text doesn't just instruct, it shapes their thoughts. Historians still argue whether manuscripts like these were more valued for their content or their craftsmanship. Some think they were revered mostly because they were rare, expensive, sacred objects. Others argue the words themselves, no matter how beautifully written, were the real treasure. You suspect it's both. The physical book is a marvel, but it's what it says that lives in their bones. Later still, you're invited to a study session. Not quite a lecture, not quite a debate, more like a sleepy theological podcast with Latin footnotes. The room is dim, the fire low, the manuscript laid out between three monks as they pore over a passage from Augustine. There's disagreement. Not angry, but intense. One monk insists the phrase illuminet mentem refers to divine light illuminating the mind. Another suggests it's about practical clarity, like, being able to see what you're doing. The third proposes both are right and insists on writing a marginal gloss to capture the nuance. Ink bottle out. Quill dipped. Footnote war engaged. Quirky tidbit. Some manuscripts are absolutely stuffed with these marginal notes. Entire columns filled with clashing interpretations, sarcastic rebuttals, and the occasional doodle of a knight stabbing a snail. Historians still don't agree on what the snails represent. Sin? Laziness? Secret monastic humor? Choose your own adventure. You help turn a fragile page and are struck by the layers of voices within. The original scribe, the illuminator, the binder, the user, the reader, the rebuker, all of them talking across time. It's not just a book. It's a room full of monks centuries apart, still arguing over the Latin for love. As the fire dies down, someone dozes off with their head on the desk. The manuscript, mercifully, remains ink side up. You walk back through the silent corridors, the echo of chant still hanging in the air. You pass the scriptorium. Empty now, but the ink stains remain. The tools rest quietly on the desk. The smell of vellum and lamp oil lingers like a perfume made of memory. You think about how one book, just one, has traveled through so many hands, been read aloud, sung, glossed, disputed, shelved, and dusted. Tomorrow it may be open again, or not for another 100 years. But it will wait. It has all the time in the world. You pause outside your cell and whisper one of the verses from earlier. In thy light shall we see light. Appropriate, considering you've spent weeks covered in soot, ink, and gold dust. The candle flickers low. You think about the next book. And the one after that. Someone, somewhere, will read what you helped create, even if they never know your name. The final days of your manuscript journey arrive without much ceremony. There's no procession, no grand unveiling, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing the cycle continues, even as your own role in it fades gently into memory. The last book is shelved, the ink pots are cleaned, and even the irritable goose outside the cloister seems to honk a little less often. You wake early, long before the bell, and wander the grounds before the sun crests the hills. A soft mist rolls through the cloister walk, curling around your ankles. Somewhere, someone is grinding fresh oak galls. Another novice, perhaps, beginning the journey you now know by heart. You smile and stretch your arms. Your shoulders pop like old wooden doors. It's been a long season. But as any monk will tell you, nothing truly ends in a monastery. Books don't just finish. They continue. Someone will open that volume you helped bind. Someone will trace the calligraphy you etched with aching fingers. Your labor has joined a river of text that flows through the centuries, quiet, steady, and deep. You're tasked with one final duty: inventory. You spend the day checking each manuscript in the scriptorium and library, noting their state. A few bindings need attention. A page in one psalter has begun to crack, too much sun. A book of homilies smells faintly of vinegar. Someone left it near the pickled herring. Mistakes happen. As you leaf through these volumes, you find yourself pausing on the marginalia, those little doodles and scrawls. A dragon chasing a rabbit. A monk asleep under a tree. A smudge where someone sneezed mid-sentence and forgot to clean it. You add your own tiny flourish to one blank margin, quill crossed with an acorn. It's a signature without a name. You climb to the top of the bell tower that evening, manuscript dust still under your nails. From up here, you can see the fields of oak trees stretching toward the horizon, gnarled and noble, patient as ever. You think back to the beginning. The gall wasp, the sticky marble, the stench. And yet, from that grotesque little orb came something beautiful. Ink that speaks across time. Words that linger long after voices fall silent. Mainstream historical fact. Many monasteries in medieval Europe were the sole producers and keepers of books for entire regions. For centuries, they were the guardians of knowledge, and it was ink from oak galls, of all things, that gave that knowledge its permanence. You watch a novice haul water from the well, and can't help but chuckle. He's complaining to himself, something about the bucket being too heavy. You remember that feeling. You remember thinking, there's no way I'm going to make it through this. And yet here you are, ink-stained, bulky, but content. And now for the fringe tidbit. Some monks believed ink held spiritual power. Not just the words written with it, but the very liquid itself. There are whispered records, more folklore than fact, that monks would anoint themselves with the first drop of a new ink batch for clarity of mind. Did it work? Hard to say. But as you stare at your hands, still faintly marked with streaks of iron gall, you do feel a little wiser. Historians still argue whether the scriptorium was a place of true scholarship or simply rote labor. Some say it was a sacred workshop. Others claim it was more akin to intellectual imprisonment. You know the truth lies somewhere in the ink-stained middle. It was hard. It was holy. And above all, it was human. As night settles over the monastery, you find yourself in the scriptorium one last time. The room is empty, quiet except for the creak of your boots and the crackle of the hearth's final embers. You lay out a sheet of blank parchment. One page, clean, unsullied. You dip your quill into a well of leftover ink, inky black, the kind that whispers. And you're right, not a prayer, not a psalm, just a note. Someone was here. Someone cared. This mattered. You roll the parchment, tuck it into a niche in the wall, and let the candle burn low beside it. And now the work is done. And now the lights are low. The ink has dried. The books are resting in their shelves, snug as dreams wrapped in leather and linen. The tools of the trade, quills, blades, presses, are put away, their work complete for the day. Outside, the oak trees sway gently in the breeze, as if whispering secrets through their leaves to the stars above. You lie back, arms behind your head, letting the quiet settle into your bones. No bells, no rules, just the slow rhythm of breath, like the turning of parchment in a calm, candlelit room. You think of the journey, of wasps and monks, of iron and fire, of patience and persistence. It was a strange alchemy, wasn't it? Something ugly transformed into something beautiful. A stink becoming a story. Let yourself feel the weight of history, not as a burden, but as a blanket. So many hands came before you. So many will follow. And that's comforting. You're part of something slow and enduring, soft echo stretching through the centuries. There's no rush now. Let your thoughts drift, like dust motes in a shaft of morning sun. Maybe you're still in the scriptorium. Maybe you're walking among the trees. Maybe you've become ink yourself, soaking gently into the page of someone else's story. That's okay. The world outside can wait. For now, close your eyes. Let the silence hold you. Let the parchment of sleep unfold. You've earned your rest.